been a lot of talk lately about Twitter lists, and you know, Chris Brogan doesn't like them, and Robert Scoble likes them, and other people are whining and saying various things. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, and if you think that it will help in some of that filtering that we're talking about.
The NHL just did something really cool. I said to these guys over this week, and that's on for Twitter for NHL. They start creating Twitter lists for each of the teams with fans of those teams. And if you're the NHL, I mean, if you're an NHL fan, that's a great way to connect with other like-minded fans.
They had to get them all back from Robbie first.
I'm sorry?
They had to get them all back from Robbie first.
Well, but so instead of creating different accounts, multiple accounts on the same account for NHL, they're using Twitter list and then crowdsourcing, saying, hey, whichever @reply us and tell us which team you're a fan of, we'll add you to the list.
But Twitter is limiting it to a certain number, right?
Yeah, and so some fans of certain teams were cut out from that, and then of course we're unhappy about that. And but you know, Twitter, I think that the concept of Twitter list, where I think it's really interesting, is you know, if you use TweetDeck, for example, a Twitter client, you can already create groups. I think that the difference, though, is that your groups are pretty much private to yourself. Yep. And Twitter list, what I like about it is you have the option to make it publicly available and to be able to surface your lists publicly available, and then to discover other people like that. That's very powerful.
When I think one of the important concepts that's already starting to surface now is this notion of authority on Twitter. So I think the StatSheet account is a part of 20 lists, but there's some that's already a part of hundreds of lists. And so another measure people are using, maybe even brand reach for other companies, is how many lists is your Twitter account a part of? So that's something else to kind of keep an eye on that'll start evolving more over the next few months as more people start using lists and start trying to integrate them into their brand.
When I see list, it's not just about the content. And I've heard it actually in two different rooms today. One person said the future of the internet is, what do they say, content. And I heard a few minutes ago, content is king. We've all heard that. And I say that's crap. I don't think content is the future. I say the future of the internet is context. And not content is king, but context is king. So I like what Twitter's doing to provide lists and to provide context around the content. I think that's, there's an explosion of content, and we need people to help us make sense of the content. That context is so critically important. It's just one more way to provide context around content.
Going back to your earlier question about actually making money on Twitter, one of the interesting ways you can make money on Twitter, and I think some people will do this pretty quickly, is to create curated lists that are private lists that are all private accounts. And so to get access to that list, you'll have to pay for it. So it is a pay-per-tweet or pay-per-view tweet stream, basically, that you can get access to. I think I haven't heard anybody talking about it yet, but I would not doubt that we're going to see that within the next 3 to 4 months.
Part of the filtering concept.
Yeah.
David, I'm hopeful it's content and context.
Well, of course, it's context around the content, and without the content, you have no context. So the things, John, that your company does, and we're talking about real time. I was thinking about this before. I mean, ESPN's been in the business of real time since well before we were calling it real time.
Well, that's what sports is, right?
It really is. Between the live broadcast, live stats, you guys, we're a leader.
Yeah, trying. Next question, right here.
How do you guys see some of the more niche content that you're creating on the real-time internet integrating with what ESPN and other more mainstream media companies are doing? And a good question for you too, John.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the panelists first. I mean, what's interesting about Twitter, and you see it, is just the growth of tons of different voices and niche sites, and mainstream media, quote unquote, is struggling to figure out what to do with it. What's your perspective on his question?
If I understand the question, it's how does what say like either what Spitter.com is doing or StatSheet relate to say what ESPN is doing?
Yeah.
So for Spitter.com, we're an aggregator, and we provide context around the content. So if ESPN is publishing articles and it has to do with a specific team, we may be aggregating that content along with other content that's interesting to fans of that team. So we're part of an ecosystem helping fans to be able to get content from more than one location all in one place. So I see it not too unlike either some things that go on in Twitter or some things that go on in some other vertical channels. So for example, StockTwits does something similar for finance and investing, or TechMeme does something similar for news, for technology news. So it's part of an ecosystem that works together.
You guys have any other thoughts on that? I would just say it's just you know, as far as we're concerned, it's more media, it's growing up, it's new places to go, and to the extent that these groups serve a niche or serve a need for sports fans, certainly something that ESPN ESPN needs to look at. And we talked this morning. There's just no barrier to entry, and this is just another way. I was going to say to Jeramie, it struck me that athletes have responded to Twitter in a way that they did not respond initially to the first set of, you know, broadband sports, the first set of sites that were designed just to be athlete websites. What's the difference?
I think the biggest difference is the ease of use. You know, all of these athletes today all have cell phones. They're on their phones constantly. They're texting their friends. They're texting their loved ones, texting family. So they were already used to doing that all the time, and it's so easy to pick up your phone and send a tweet in one sentence. And they have a lot of free time. You know, they have free time on the bus or after practice on an off day.
Sometimes during the games themselves.
Well, true. Not anymore, but yes. So that's the biggest thing, I think, the ease of use to doing it. Also, in the past, you know, a lot of guys have their own websites or have had their own blogs. I think it was intimidating for a lot of guys, a lot of the athletes, to actually try to sit down and write a 5 or 6 paragraph blog that flowed and expressed, you know, their articulate thoughts, and they were too scared to sit down and do that. But you know, a tweet is 140 characters. It's so easy, and they almost feel like they're just talking to friends because it's their fans already, so they can just sit down and shoot something out quickly. And then the last point is I think it really became trendy too. Once a guy like Shaq got on and embraced it and was really into it, loving it, and he was getting attention for it, then other athletes started to say, hey, that's kind of cool what he's doing. Maybe I should try that too. And then next thing you know, it's a trickle effect. And now there's, you know, hundreds of athletes, especially in the NBA, there's tons of them on Twitter, and I think it just spiraled quickly once they all saw how easy it was and how popular it was becoming.
On your own mobile devices, what app or what mobile website do you use to send your own Twitter, to send your own tweets or monitor what goes on?
I use Eckoff.
I had Twitterberry, and I'm now using Uber Twitter.
I use Tweety.
I use it on my Palm Pre. I had to look the name of it. Tweet free.
Okay.
I like it.
I use the Eckoff too, so it is interesting. More questions from the audience?
I was wondering if you could speak to how you measure the results or success of your Twitter campaign.
So I could talk about this one specifically. So I launched, you know, again, the 650 accounts in December of last year. And so in most of the tweets that I would send out related to standings or the new rankings that just came out for a particular team, I'd put a link back to StatSheet.com if you wanted to look at more information. Before then, Twitter did not even show up on my top 50 in terms of referral traffic to StatSheet.com. Within a month of me launching those accounts, it went to number 2 behind Google within a month. And if I still were, you know, had all those accounts, it might even be beyond Google at this point. So at least for, you know, my little experiment with Twitter, it was significant in terms of the amount of traffic it was able to drive, and it was, you know, pretty easy to capture.
I would say we're doing the same thing. We obviously are using trackable links for all of the content that we link to backtosuns.com or planetorange.net, which is our official team social network. But also just seeing how many people actually will retweet things or will reply to your tweets is sort of an informal indicator of how well they're being received and whether or not fans are paying attention and listening and enjoying them, I think.
We completely rely on Twitter. We don't work without it. So if Twitter's down, we are 100% down. If Twitter's up, we're up for the most part. So I would like Twitter to be a little bit more up. We talk to them pretty frequently. The fail whale seems to have come back in the last month or so. It was gone for a while. But they've got big scaling problems that most of us hopefully might get to deal with someday, but don't now. So I can't really complain to them too much.
Yeah, I think Robbie and you guys are spot on. We look at it much the same way you do, Robbie.